There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind.
Male voices dominate most conversations, and in the space industry, this is particularly acute.
And it's this generation's job to build that road to space so that the future generations can unleash their creativity.
But if you could find women better qualified than yourself, how would you welcome them in the program? They would be very welcome.
Our narratives about space have been aggressive, sexist, one-dimensional, and anything but inclusive. So when we look to the future, when we look up at the night sky and dare to dream up what's possible, whose dream are we really living? Women have fought for their place among the stars for decades, and yet the reality for many women is that there is no space in space for them. It's almost impossible to calculate the multi-generational cost of lost potential. The women in this film represent all corners of the space industry. And despite their experiences with gender discrimination and harassment, they persisted to find a place in space. These stories are far too common if only we took the time to ask. So we asked.
We saw Wally. She went to space, and I think that was a huge achievement for all of us because we're seeing someone who has worked her entire life, and finally she was able to go and make her dreams come true. But who's to account for all those women who have given up in that process? Who's to account for all those women who have come this close to their goal and given up because people did not give them the opportunity?
I think that the rules have been established to where it makes it impossible for women to meet the qualifications of astronauts.
Not every woman gets a success story, or resolution, or even catharsis. In fact, most don't. Many women continue to fight against a current that relentlessly tries to wash them away. This film is about all women, not just those that fit within a narrative selected for us by the men in charge.
Which is shown for all day, all of first shift Tuesday, the tank pressurization test.
Women are allowed to be in the room, but they're going to be made to feel uncomfortable if they're there, especially if they have opinions.
Globally, women make up only 11% of astronauts, 20% of space industry workers, and 29% of researchers, scientists, and engineers.
In the space industry, a lot of the fields are very male-dominated. Females tend to be treated unfairly or underestimated.
The old right stuff hasn't changed in a lot of ways.
It made me realize that my voice didn't matter as much as the voice of my male peers.
I've been kicked out of study rooms because they said this was a guys-only study room.
I definitely have been told that I'm not technical enough to be in a STEM field. It's like a consistent thing that I hear. I'm tearing up a little bit right now because I dated a guy in college, and I very, very vividly remember him saying, "You better hope I don't break up with you because you'll never graduate from this school if I do."
I also have experienced a lot of toxicity and rejection and just kind of that overall wall of unacceptance as a female and as a female that does not have a higher education. I tend to be easily dismissed.
I find myself where I might be the only woman in a room, and I'll wonder, is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I'm Black?
Sometimes I do feel the weight of having to prove my expertise. Africa has a number of challenges already that it's dealing with, but also a number of stereotypes that it has to fight against, especially when it concerns technology and advancement. As an African, I go to great lengths to sound eloquent and informed because, again, of those perceived stereotypes.
I seriously considered dropping aerospace engineering from my majors because there were so many instances and situations where I felt like I was constantly pushed out of the places that I was taught were the ones that I needed to be in. I was constantly made to feel like I had to fight to prove myself, which made me think that maybe I was not meant to be in them at all.
There's just a lot of incidences of belittling or like having to prove yourself, being talked over. I've brought it up and no one really did anything. So I withdrew kind of from my program. I still put the work in, right? I hit the check boxes and stuff, but it was pretty obvious to the rest of the team that I wasn't as engaged as I was before.
We do become very invisible.
There is this invisible departure of countless women in the field that have just become too exhausted, too diminished, too traumatized to keep fighting for their role in the space industry. And it's no mystery what's causing this. It's a lack of support, it's victim blaming, it's turning a blind eye because that's what's easier.
If I've gone to HR with an issue, I have been asked, are you just being too sensitive to this issue?
So there have been times where I have simply had to keep things to myself and remain quiet, not only because there was no way to resolve it, but also because I perceived it at the time as threatening to my position in the workplace.
Over and over again, it has been an overwhelming response from men around me who say, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. They say very, very insensitive things, like they say, oh, nobody's, raping you, or nobody's murdering you. And they don't realize the weight of their words.
And then sometimes it becomes more than just words. The aggression, it manifests itself in more insidious ways. And too many women are caught off guard by how quickly life can change in a moment, emerging from their traumas with pieces of themselves lost, pieces of their spirit now made irreconcilable by a space that dismisses them.
I had an incident of stalking and just really inappropriate behavior that was escalating. And the solution there was to move this individual, and he moved 3 desks away instead of next to me. Yeah, that was a scary one. It's a new job. It's all I've got. You don't want to burn bridges,
I'm in this state of like hyper awareness. Am I coming off as too friendly? Am I smiling a little too much? Am I smiling less? Am I coming off as bossy? Why is that guy staring at me?
We did have a leader who was an executive director, and he was very chauvinistic. I had really natural curly hair. I love it. I call it my happy hair. And he was obsessed with my hair. When I say obsessed, it was a very unnatural obsession with it. Wanting to touch my hair, wanting to put his fingers in my hair. One time he was standing near me and he was trying to sniff it. And then one time, me and this other girl ended up having to ride with him in a vehicle. We started talking about his wife holding out on him, and he was going to have to find a way to get some. Someone filed something against him at HR, and then they ended up getting retaliated against, and they're no longer at the organization anymore. He is still there, and he just got promoted. And I said, of course he did. Of course he did.
I directly told him that I am not interested in having any kind of relationship with you. And still there were 100 messages that were coming after that. I have reported him 5 times. And I didn't see any change in his behavior, but I was assuming that no one is taking care of the situation. So I kept quiet, and then I found out it's not just me. It's almost all the females in the department, in the building that had that experience. He is now a PhD student, and he's research assistant something, and he's taking care of newcomers. They don't know how evil he is, and it's going to happen to them too.
This builds up. It's not an isolated incident. It's something that every woman faces. It's so alarming to see just how normalized it is, to a point where everyone considers this a part of their life, of their daily routine. Women shouldn't have to feel unsafe.
You don't think it's going to happen to you, and you think you're still somehow in control of the situation, and then eventually you're confronted with somebody that you can't control.
I was dealing with a hostile workplace to the point where things were physically violent, and it wasn't something where the company really wanted to take care of it because the person that was causing all of this behavior was quite senior to the point of being untouchable. And so after I reported being harassed, the company's tactic was they knew they couldn't fire me, so they decided to make my life miserable until I quit. Day after day of having responsibilities taken away, having my salary sabotaged, moving my office into a closet. One of my coworkers pointed out that they couldn't remember the last time they had seen me smile, and they said, "You need to get out of here." It was the toughest decision that I ever made to leave what was otherwise my dream job because someone else couldn't control their behavior.
I had a sexual assault incident on campus. I did something very typical of survivors, and that was to ignore it. So I didn't come forward until months after it. Went to Title IX, I went to the police, and nothing happened. There was a lack of evidence and too much time had passed. The reason I decided to come forward is because I had caught wind that it had happened to another girl from the same person. Literally all you have to do is just ask any of your female friends if they've ever experienced something like this, and you will get a whole slew of stories that you did not expect.
I was involved in a campus case for gender harassment and sexual harassment. There was a lot of fallout from that. Like my project manager going behind my back and saying I was such a bitch for tearing the team up, and people saying that I was essentially like a homewrecker. One of the guys that I had a no contact order against went on to be arrested for sexual assault, and CU Boulder will forever have blood on their hands because they didn't handle this appropriately. The guy who was arrested, he was never convicted and was allowed to come back to school the next day and to be in the same classroom as the person he had assaulted.
I would say it's taken up a lot of my mental energy, which that mental energy should be going towards work. That should be going towards putting humans in space.
There's a lot of organizations out there that preach that age-old message of space is for everybody, but they don't put actions behind those words.
I'm also an international student in the space industry, and my entire journey is so unique that there's hardly a few people who understand it. But at the same time, this uniqueness is what makes it important, because we need to have narratives like this to tell people that there is no one single narrative or one single journey.
I would have liked to be acknowledged in that, yes, my identity is very interdisciplinary. It's very faceted, and it needs to be addressed as a diverse experience. So I look forward to using my own experiences to develop a narrative, and then also tapping into my other identities as particularly as a low-income student, as an Asian American woman, as an Indigenous Taiwanese person, as a gender-fluid, non-binary person, to attach all of these identities together and to explore what narrative that has to offer within the aerospace world.
Men still hold most of the influence, most of the power in space and STEM. And so if you're not being an active ally, if you're not speaking up and speaking out for people, then you're sort of complicit in it.
I am non-binary, and my perspective is from all gender minorities and not just women. I would say that the experience of gender minorities in STEM is very complicated. I will only feel included and like I belong when the institution treats me like it treats its men. These changes are only effective if they are held accountable by policies or by processes that allow people who are marginalized to hold them accountable.
It's so draining to constantly be thinking about, will I be underestimated? Will I be harassed? It sounds really simple, but my dream for women in space is honestly to just exist freely.
If you were to add up how much time women are forced to think about their looks, am I overdoing it? Am I underdoing it? To think about, is this guy gonna try to harass me later on? If you added up all those hours, just in the space industry alone, all that time, we'd be on Mars by now.
My goal has always been to reach for the moon and the stars. My goal ultimately is to advocate for everyone who feels like they don't belong here. We need more representation. We need more women managers. We need more women engineers. We need women to take the lead.
It's not just enough to not discriminate. Like, you have to make sure the environment is inclusive, and it's not up to the marginalized person to teach you. Like, you need to put in the effort to teach yourself.
In that small handful of women who have gone to space, how many of them are women of color? How many women of color are CEOs? How many women of color are STEM advocates? In the end, if we put the decision-making in the hands of people who are statistically proven to give women of color lesser opportunities, we will not see anything different.
Everybody should want this to be better because we're risking losing so many talented people who want to be there. I mean, space is full of passionate people. No one goes into this industry because they're mildly interested in space. I can't wait to see a woman set foot on the moon or Mars. So far, no women have set foot on any other celestial bodies, and it's about time that one finally gets the chance to do so.
I can bring my experience to this not so diverse world. People can now see, oh, but look, here's a Caribbean woman who's in this space, so that means that I can do it too.
I think women are just going to bring a new perspective to the idea of exploration. It's been completely dominated throughout human history, for the most part by men, and specifically white men. And so changing the optics of what exploration means, I think, is going to be really interesting and significant as we start looking beyond Earth. We're going to see a much more representative sample of all of Earth's population coming into the space industry, which is what we need as we're preparing to make humanity an interplanetary species.
I care about the welfare of people on the planet and in the industry. I want to make this world a more inclusive, a more equitable, a safer, a happier space.
It should be accessible to all. Everyone has a rightful place here.
After I had my experience with harassment, it was extremely demoralizing, and I wondered if I should stick around at all. Like, was my love of space worth being treated like that and putting up with that kind of behavior?
I think at some point we all ask ourselves, how much more of this can we take? Will tomorrow be the breaking point? And so it's hard to keep convincing yourself that things will change, that they'll get better. You see more and more women leaving the industry, and you hear these stories of discrimination, stories of harassment, stories of assault. But once the headline's gone cold, no one seems to care. So you begin to question, do I stay?
Somewhere in this world, there's a woman who has a life-changing idea, but is doubting herself, and that idea dies with that doubt.